Bula Vinaka, everyone. My name is Samsoni Pareti. I'm the publisher of Violence Business Magazine. And welcome and thank you for being here with us at Talanoa number 3 of our Pacific Blue Talanoa series here at the Fale of the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat in Suva, Fiji. As is the practice, whenever the Pacific Islanders come together for a Talanoa, we always start with a prayer, and for that we will invite the Reverend James Bagwan to say a prayer for us.
Mentamasu, let us pray. Loving God, God of the land and sea and sky, God of all creation, God of light, God of life, God of truth, and God of love. As we gather in your presence this morning, we acknowledge that you are a God who hears the sufferings of his people. You are a God who speaks truth and calls us to do so also in love. Your minds, we ask, O God, for your spirit of truth to permeate our Talanoa, your spirit of love, of active listening and sharing. We pray, O Lord, for those who continue to suffer violence, suffer because of COVID-19, and the many other challenges that we face in the Pacific. Particularly pray for those who are victims of abuse. We ask, O God, for your wisdom, not only in our Talanoa today, but in the work that you call us for a Pacific where life, dignity, and justice is affirmed. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Now we will invite our host, Madam Secretary General Dame Meg Taylor, to say a few words of welcome.
Oh, thank you. Your Excellencies and members of the Diplomatic Corps, our Pacific youth, represented by students from the University of South Pacific, and friends from the civil society organizations, and panelists, ladies and gentlemen, and I see here also many friends and academics from USP as well, and my own colleagues here at the Secretariat. Welcome to the Pacific Island Forum, and thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Thank you for making the time to participate in this important discussion on human rights in the region in today's session on West Papua. In the coming weeks, we will be discussing other human rights issues. But human rights are intrinsically linked to the forum's agenda and purpose as captured by the vision of the Framework for Pacific Regionalism, which envisages a region of peace, harmony, security, social inclusion, and prosperity so that all Pacific people can lead free, healthy, and productive lives. Among other key values, the framework also embraces the full observance of democratic values, the rule of law, the defense and promotion of all human rights, gender equality, and commitment to just societies. So it's no surprise that human rights are embedded across all the Forum Secretariat's work programs, including climate change, sustainable development, gender, governance, and security. In today's session, I look forward to our specific focus on the issue of human rights in West Papua, a region which, of course, shares the Forum's only land border with my home country, Papua New Guinea. In 2000, the issue of West Papua was first raised collectively by the Forum leaders. In recent years, I have seen this issue elevated to becoming a matter of urgency, and it is a standing agenda item on the Pacific Islands Forum. This was done thanks to the involvement of Pacific civil society and the inclusive approach taken by the framework of Pacific regionalism. And I'm pleased to see several stakeholders here today that are integral to delivering on leaders' pronouncements in 2019 at the 50th Pacific Island Forum in Tuvalu, which my Secretariat colleague will speak to. So while we discuss the issues of importance for the Pacific Islands Forum, it is appropriate that we gather in this Fale as an appropriate venue and setting that provides comfort, shade, and security, as our ancestors have done in the past, to discuss important issues. So I echo the sentiments of the facilitator in calling for our discussions today to be conducted in the spirit of Talanoa, and encourage all of us today to be respectful of each other, taking this opportunity to come together, to dialogue, to learn from each other, try to understand each other, but really to move the issue forward for our brothers and sisters in West Papua. I thank you and wish the panelists well in their deliberations. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nakawalebu, Madam Secretary General. As has been said by the Magdala, this is a Pacific Talanoa, and of course, it will be done in the spirit of the Talanoa that all of us in the Pacific are familiar with. We're talking about today's theme, human rights and West Papua, or Papua. Before I introduce to you our members of the panel, some of you coming in this morning must have seen, those of you in the Fale here in Suva, a mat being laid out in front of the lectern on which we stand. And that is also part of the Pacific Talanoa. You usually sit around a mat. And because of that, we have the mat symbolizes certain perimeters on how Talanoa are conducted. And allow me to just to say, as a cursor to our discussion Talanoa this morning, that we acknowledge that all panelists and members of our audience come from different backgrounds. It is a special and unique opportunity to bring together a diverse group of stakeholders to discuss human rights in the region, in this case, West Papua. So this is the first, as you've heard, in a series of human rights Talanoa. So to ensure that our panelists and members of our audience are able to participate openly and constructively in this Talanoa, it is important that we are respectful, as had been stressed by the Magdala, Madam Secretary General, and participate in a peaceful manner. In order to maintain and encourage constructive and meaningful engagement, therefore, again, the members of the panel and the audience are asked to respect the spirit of Talanoa, coming together to openly and respectfully share and hear different perspectives. As you know, the concept is a Pacific one, where community or parties lay out the mat, as we've done, and discuss matters that are important to the community in a safe setting, using respectful language to find a way forward. Therefore, we ask that those who have the floor and the microphone to speak are able to freely speak without interruption. As your facilitator, I will provide you with the opportunity to respond. So therefore, there will be no shouting or interruptions. This is not the appropriate place for that. Rather, this is an opportunity to sit down with one another and try to peacefully address an issue that is dear to all of our hearts, human rights. We are mindful that the audience members are also joining us from around the world on the Zoom platform, and we will reserve space for them to ask questions or make comments. In the interest of time, we also ask that questions or comments be succinct and to the point and are respectful of the Talanoa and those present. And as we'll open up the floor on the second part of our discussion, of course, being the Pacific Talanoa, I will ask each of you asking questions to state your name, the organization that you represent, and who you're directing your questions to. Because of that, I will start by saying that although I did introduce myself as working for the magazine Untitled Business, I'm originally from Lau, in the province of Lau in Fiji. And I respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, the Turanga Tuisuva and the Abusau Nandonu Mai. Now to our members of the panel. We have, of course, from the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, Alifeleti, Soakai, and we are also joined on the line by Nick Messet, also Dr. Velix Wanggai, as well as Rosa Moiwend. This is our youth Pacific young Yougsolwara. And of course, last but not the least, the Reverend James Bagwan, who opened our discussion with a prayer. Each of them will have 3 minutes to say opening statements. Before then, we'll open up the floor to you, members of the audience here on the Fale, as well as for those who are joining us by Zoom online. Without further ado, I'll invite Mr. Alifeleti Soakai to speak on the Pacific human rights and the Pacific Islands Forum and West Papua. Mr. Soakai.
Thank you, Samsoni, Secretary General, Excellencies, Youth of the Pacific, USP students, colleagues, online and here in the audience. Kolovinaka, Malolele. We had invited our colleagues from SPC, from the Regional Rights Resource Team to be here, but unfortunately they have urgent matters to attend to. So they've asked me to present on human rights in the Pacific. I also have colleagues here who are experts in this area and may pick up the slack if I'm unable to address any specific issues from the audience. Next slide, please. There you have it, the big nine, the 9 major human rights conventions in the world, and that shows to you that in the Pacific Islands, we have varying guarantees and protection of human rights in the constitutions and bills of rights enshrined in our laws. You can see countries are doing better than others, and it's essentially a 2-step process where you sign on and then you ratify these conventions in your national parliaments. There is a slight increase in the ratification of international human rights treaties and mechanisms. We've done well, but we've got a long way to go. Next slide, please. So what are the key issues? There remains a high prevalence of rape of violence against women and girls. This is a black mark against the Pacific. I understand that over 70% of women in my own country, and in this country and other countries of the region, at some point in their life are subject to violence. The marginalization of peoples with disabilities continue, resulting in low economic, health, and education outcomes. Our communities in the LGBTQI communities remain discriminated against. There is a lack of access to basic health, education, and social services, particularly in our remote and rural areas. And this is a big priority for a lot of our governments, although some of us are not doing so well in the three areas that I just spoke to. I hope you can see that, but it just sets out the regional frameworks and commitments that our leaders have signed on to. The first is the Pacific Islands Gender Equality Declaration passed in the Cook Islands in 12. Thank you, Seema. Of course, there's the Pacific Framework for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Denarau and Port Vila Declaration on Human Rights. The diagram sets out what we've done in the region. It's a lot, but there still remains a lot of work to be done. What are the key human rights developments thus far? In Fiji and the Marshall Islands, they are members of the UN Human Rights Council. And I acknowledge Ms. Heike, who's the representative from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Pacific countries have set up different mechanisms to strengthen human rights and responses and interventions in the form of national human rights committees and task force. There is an increasing interest in the establishment of national human rights mechanisms. A number of them have carried out feasibility studies. I understand there are 2 standing national human rights bodies in the region, that is in Samoa and in this country, Fiji. That is essentially providing the brief context of human rights in the Pacific. If you read the reports, it's not pleasant reading for some of the areas that we are lacking. And so we freely admit that, because we need a lot of work to be done and we need everybody on board. I will now speak to what I know better, and that's the Pacific Islands and specifically West Papua. We were 49 years old, being founded in 1971. We have 18 full members. We are the Pacific's main political decision-making body, enshrined in decisions made by forum leaders, our ministers, and our officials. This is very important to note for the students who may not be aware of the wheels of bureaucracy. We are a rules-based organization with established processes to guide our foreign policy, our operations, and the important implementation. Decisions that our leaders make are made through consensus. We have never taken a vote on any particular issue. And the reason why I use consensus is because, although it's harder, we get a decision that everybody agrees to. And a good example is the Kainaki Lua declaration made in Tuvalu last year. Leaders spent 13 hours in frank, open, and robust discussions, is the diplomatic language. And we came out with a declaration which is not perfect by some views, but it's one that commits all the regions, including 2 developed countries, Australia and New Zealand. So consensus is a difficult path. It only takes one person to say no, and we have to go back and find a way forward. And that aligns with our Pacific way of consensus, of dialogue, and finding a way forward, compromise. Within our forum architecture, we have associate members, we have observers, we have private sector, civil society, and forum dialogue partners. Indonesia was joined as a forum dialogue partner 19 years ago in 2001. So what have we done in West Papua? The issue was first raised in Kiribati 20 years ago, when leaders expressed deep concern over violence and the loss of life in Irian Jaya, brackets West Papua, and they called on the Indonesian government, which is the sovereign authority, and successionist groups to resolve differences peacefully through dialogue and consultation and uphold their human rights. We also welcomed closer dialogue with Indonesia. The forum's position is squarely focused on human rights. Since then, leaders have discussed West Papua on 9 occasions. And in 2015, through the Framework for Pacific Regionalism, specifically the Specialist Subcommittee on Regionalism, and through the intervention of civil societies, the matter was raised and elevated to the forum leaders to become a standing agenda item on their agenda. But last year, leaders reaffirmed Indonesia's sovereignty. They raised concerns of the escalating violence that flared up in December 2018. And they re-emphasized our position on concerns over violence. You have it there, what was decided last year. The last point is very important because a lot of our work hinges on the fact-finding of the mission that Indonesia invited the High Commissioner of Human Rights to undertake in West Papua. That was done last year, and we are waiting for that mission to go ahead. We've hit a roadblock with COVID, but we still believe that that mission should go ahead, notwithstanding the safety considerations. Leaders have requested for an evidence-based informed report that will be discussed at the next Forum Leaders meeting here in Fiji, God willing, next year. As I said, the SSCR is an important part of the work we do. And through our closer dialogue, open, constructive dialogue, and through the intervention of Mr. Nick Messett, we were able to visit West Papua in 2017 to observe provincial elections in Jayapura and Manokwari. The report from that observation is on our website if you want to read it. We've had the observations from that mission is that sadly Papuans are lacking participation in economic activity. That's a reality. We noted a lot of transmigration, and these are the Secretariat's own observations. The issues in West Papua are extremely complex because a West Papuan could either be for or against independence or sovereignty, self-determination. It's very complicated. We've had a number of invitations from the government of Indonesia to observe provincial and presidential elections. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to take that up because some of them were late and we weren't able to get our members together because we always take our members with you. In 2017, Indonesia approached the Secretariat and proposed a dialogue mechanism. We hope to move forward on that so that we can discuss all issues, including West Papua. We've had the pleasure of attending Bali Democracy Forum, and of course last year in Auckland was the Pacific Expo put on by Indonesia. The other work we're doing is to engage the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights on the mission to West Papua, and we have done that regularly. Secretary General has been in communication with High Commissioner Bachelet. That's my slide. Thank you, moderator, and apologies for going over time.
Alfred. Okay. Now we'll join our next speaker online, and we welcome Nick Messett. As you've heard from Alfred in his presentation, Nick is a special staff for special autonomy for coordinating Minister for Politics, Law and Security Affairs in Jakarta, Indonesia. And his former work was as a pilot for Air New Guinea and Air Vanuatu. Bula Vinaka, Nick.
Bula.
Now we are listening to you for your opening statement for 3 minutes. Vinaka.
Thank you. I might take about 5 or 6 minutes, something like that. Bula, good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi. My name is Nicholas Simeone Messett. They usually call me Nick Messett. I was former member of the Free Papua movement, and I would like to thank you, Secretary General, for saying that in 2000, because in 2000, I was also representing Papua, Presidium Council of Papua at the Bitapaka in Kiribati we are the one, myself, the late Franz Albert Yoku, and Mehue, we are the one that discussed with the late LOI to put Indonesia as a dialogue partner in the Pacific Island Forum. That's the history that I'm here today to say thank you, that we can sort it out our problems in the Pacific within the community in the Pacific, because Papua and West Papua are also Melanesians, and we think that our grievances have to be heard in Pacific and also around the world. I'm speaking now on behalf of the Indonesian government. I return because I see that fighting for independence outside is impossible. I have to come back and work within the Indonesia to try to find out any amicable solution. That I'm happy that Pacific Island Forum has taken this Talanoa session discussing the issues of West Papua regarding human rights. May I go on? First of all, let me express my sincere appreciation to the Secretary General of the PIF, Dame McTaylor, and her staff for arranging Talanoa session, Pacific Island Forum on human rights issues in Papua and West Papua. Human rights issues is a universal issue that we can see happening around the world in many forms and conditions, not least in Indonesia, which our attention is brought to Papua and West Papua. As you might know, Indonesia is a multicultural and multi-ethnic nation. We have 11 million Melanesians spreading over 5 provinces in Indonesia. Papua and West Papua are among 5 provinces that best represent our Melanesian community in many ways, customs and cultures. When it comes to human rights, almost every country has its own issues, which are unique and different from one another. But in principle, it's the right of a human being to exercise his or her will based on the laws that allows that right. Indonesia is also facing its own, but we are committed to promoting and protecting human rights, and so allege human rights cases with principles of justice. In Indonesia, we have an independent National Commission of Human Rights institution and independent NGOs which fully exercise their functions and overseeing the government efforts. The National Commission of Human Rights, where we call in Indonesian language Komnas HAM, is internationally recognized. Komnas HAM representatives, including in Papua region, may conduct supervision, mediation, and offer recommendation on any alleged human rights violations. Progressive efforts have been made by Indonesia to realize the commitment example, firstly, further strengthening legislation framework that entails higher respect human rights, ensure greater access to healthcare, education, and prosperity. It stimulates partnership between human rights institutions and civil society in Indonesia. Secondly, ensuring that not a single human rights issue goes without impunity or omission. Thirdly, advancing a national agenda reform of police and military institutions, including through development and installing human rights-based curriculums. Indonesia is also enhancing cooperation with every existing human rights mechanisms, both at the regional and global levels. Indonesia invited the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to visit Papua to witness firsthand the development progress and challenges in Papua. The visit would neither be a fact-finding mission nor mandated by the UN. The OHCHR has entrusted Indonesia to prepare the best arrangement for their visit. Indonesia's main challenge in Papua is the presence of armed civilian criminal groups which sporadic attack the civilians and villagers alike. These armed groups continue to incite with the promises and false hopes fabricated by individuals and groups overseas. Their violent actions have claimed the lives of innocent civilians. In December 2018, groups affiliated with the ULMWP massacred 19 road workers. By the way, I can say all migrants in Induga, Papua, which the problem is still exists until today. As you all might know, that recently many human rights abuses had been happening in Papua by Indonesian military and armed civilians criminal groups that killed many innocent human beings. We have to stop it. Indonesia believes that peace is not a forum to discuss issues of territorial integrity of sovereign countries. But on the other hand, PIF has a moral duty to see that human rights issue must not happen to its members and dialogue partners countries, including Papua, which is part of Indonesia. That is why we are here to discuss and try to find an amicable solution to solve this ongoing drama in Papua. And hopefully, with God's help and guidance, we might find an everlasting solution, peace. Thank you, Bula Vinaka. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much. Nawalebu, Nick Messet. Now we'll have Dr. Velix Wanggai, also joining us from Indonesia. Dr. Velix, are you there with us?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. You go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Secretary General of PIF Secretariat, Your Excellency, diplomatic community, distinguished speakers, guests, ladies and gentlemen, our brothers and sisters, all participant Talanoa sessions. First of all, I would like to introduce me. I am Velix Vernando Wanggai. Originally, my hometown in West Papua or Papua. My hometown in Yapen Island, one small island in the northern part of Papua. Like my father, Mr. Nick Messet from northern part of Papua, especially in Jayapura area. Brothers and sisters, continue to Mr. Nicholas Messet explained before, Indonesia has chosen democracy as the best way to manage the country. The government decentralized power, policy choices, and public services closer to the people. We give great attention on human rights policy at the national level and the local level across the country. Now, our government define comprehensive strategy on how to deal with human rights, such as basic right on access to education, access to the health services, water, housing, and greater participation of people, including in Papuan people in public arena. In the context of Papua, our government has defined the root causes in Papua, for example, inequality, underdeveloped area, lack of the connectivity, lack of the skill to manage their natural resources. Based on this context, today, Indonesia has continued to manage special autonomy framework for Papua and West Papua provinces. So by special autonomy framework, the government recognized Papua identity in economic, culture, social effort, and local politics. Today, we can see all governors in 2 provinces, majors, head of regencies, are all native Papuans. It means we hope Papuan leaders will understand clearly how the people needs and local aspirations and what the strategy for development in Papua and West Papua province. And by the special autonomy framework, the government also recognized Papuan culture's affairs by building the Papuan Consultative Assembly. It members from the representative of women's groups, tribals, community groups, and religious leaders. And brothers and sisters, Talanoa sessions, we realized that the Papuan people strongly related with land, cultures, and extended family. So therefore, the government is planning Papua regional policy by adopting 7 cultures area at the National Medium-Term Development Plan 2020 to 2024. This is like the 7 cultures area in Papua. Now the government adopted in National Indonesian Plan for the next 5 years. In economic affairs, we develop local community in line with their natural resources. For example, fishery in the northern part of Papua, coffee in the highland area, sagu in the southern part of Papua, like in Asmat and Mapi. Now we introduce some local industry sagu in southern part of Papua. 2 months ago, to 29 September 2020, our president, Mr. Joko Widodo, has launched the new framework for Papua. The new policy is an affirmative design for accelerating welfare, public services, and collaborative governance in Papua. The new policy emphasizes 5 pillars. 1, Papuan human capital development by affirmative actions in the national and local level. And the second about economic transformation in Papua, and based on the 7 cultural area, and we introduced integrated policy. And the third about regional infrastructure and connectivity between rural and urban linkages. Fourth about sustainable development and climate change. And the last, local democracy, good governance, bureaucracy, including human rights. Finally, actually, we promote value of human rights in all sector and developments. With understanding Papuan cultures, I think it's very important to provide the basic right of Papuan people in all sectors, educations, health, housings, jobs, and connectivity, especially in the local connectivity in many area, in the highland area, in southern part of Papua. So in the last, the national government and local government also introduced cultural approach with our brother to resolve problem in Papua. We recognize our brothers, mayors, the head of regency in across the Papua and West Papua province, make constructive dialogue with our people in the Papua to resolve problem with family relations and peaceful consultation in Papua and West Papua province. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Velix. For our next speaker, joining us also from abroad is Rosa Moiwend. Is part of the regional youth movement, the Yougsolwara Pacific, and is a human rights activist in West Papua. She will share the current state of human rights and security issues, particularly in relation to women and children. Bula Rosa, we now, floor is yours now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for Forum Secretariat. My name is Rosa Moiwend. I'm originally from the southern part of West Papua, and I'm very glad to see, in the spirit of Talanoa, it's really good to see the Papuans sitting here on the same mat even though we are speaking from different sides. But I have my brother Felix and
Yes.
also Nicholas. Well, I can call uncle because of the spirit of Papuans, and also our brothers and sisters joining us. I can see my brother Luis, Nellis, and others. So this is really good opportunity for us as a Papuan to have this Talanoa with our brothers and sisters from the Pacific. Thank you for the presentation from Brother Felix and also Uncle Nicholas about the situation and approach from the Indonesian government to Papuans, especially in relation to the development and also human rights. As a West Papuan woman, I will talk straight. And I think that's the way we usually talk. If we want to speak, we will talk straight to our brothers and our uncles to say what we want. When I heard about all this approach on development, I can also recognize some good progress, especially around the infrastructure to open access from some remote area to have more access on economy and education. But at the same time, I also have a big questions around the conflict that happening because of the process of development itself. For example, when we talk about a new project on investment under the frame of special autonomy, I think there should be some process that the government should take action, for example, in terms of principle of free prior informed consent, because many of our customary peoples, leaders, and even community, they didn't receive clear information about the approach of the development itself. That's why you can see on the ground many rejection from the customary people, from people in the community. And because of the rejection, one of the aspects that make things worse is because the way government approach them is not by having a dialogue or conversation like this, but mostly using repression with the police and military came and just attacked villagers. So I think that's very real situation that we are facing. And then I want to go more on the bigger context when Uncle Panik mentioned about Komnas HAM or National Commission of Human Rights. I think we have some cases that's already on the table of Komnas HAM, and until now we haven't actually have a good solution on that. For example, Wasior Berdara, Bloody Wasior, Wamena Berdara, Abepura Berdara, I think Biak Berdara. These are the cases that still on the waiting on the table. And I think we are and one also Paniai Berdara. And we remember that President Jokowi also promised people in Paniai to solve the problem during the Christmas celebration in Jayapura. And now we almost reached the Christmas next month, but we haven't heard anything. And then also related to the Christmas celebration next month, we still have one homework, which is Nduga case. And now we have Intan Jaya case. And all of this conflict is happening because of the some layers of the roots, but I think one of the key aspects is the political aspect. And we can't deny that there is a group that fighting between Indonesian military and the West Papua freedom fighters. And I think when we look at this conflict, ordinary people became victims of this conflict. You know, we have thousands of internal displaced people now living in Wamena and other neighbor regency from Duga. And we haven't finished working on that issue, that case, and now we have Intan Jaya also with the same kind of background. And now it's like a conversation about Intan Jaya, the conflict is also related to the Wabu block, which is related to the Freeport mining concession area. So I think all this dynamic need to be addressed by the government of Indonesia. Two things. One is from the political aspect, and one is from the human rights aspect. I think the most urgent things right now is how the government deal with the human rights issue, especially the situation of women and children, IDPs, in these two areas, but also in other parts like in Sorong, in Maibrat, it's also the same kind of situation. Now we can see IDPs move and live in Timika, in Sorong, even in Yahukimo, not only in Wamena. So we, from the human rights organizations, we're trying hard with the churches to address this issue, but it's always stuck on the promise. So I hope with Papuans on the position that very close to the government, I think this case should be addressed. Especially we talk about human life, women and children. Like many volunteers try to raise money and provide some food for these IDPs, but our hands is so short. We need more progress from the government in terms of policy, but also one thing I want to suggest is to stop this military operation and just working on the situation of our IDPs and human rights victims. And then when we talk about political aspect, I think there is a space for Indonesia to also open dialogue. I think Forum Secretariat also suggesting, or one of the recommendation is to open dialogue. And I think dialogue is very important, but we have to think about what kind of dialogue. I think that should be discussed among two parties, and that's a political process that's not my area, but I want to focus on human rights. I think under this convention or any other instrument of human rights, I think that the role of the Indonesian government as a state is very important to look after the citizens of Indonesia, and the Papuans are still the citizens, means that we also have the same rights, same as any other citizens in Indonesia. I think we can see the armed conflict is also related to political, but also related to the economic interest, investment in those area. Wabu block is new one, but we also have other issue around Freeport and other investment, like you mentioned about new plantations. I think it's also important to see whether it's very urgent for people to have a big plantation, or you can have some different approach on the development. For example, we talk about food and security. Is that food and security for the Papuans, or that food and security for the rest of the country? I think we have to have a kind of priorities, and many people in West Papua, especially children, live in malnutrition. So I think this is not only talk about a bigger planning, but I think you also need to listen to what happened on the ground. And I think that the space like this is very important internally in West Papua to talk about the approach. But still we have a problem on political level and human rights level that we need policy and clear action from the government to guarantee the rights of the citizen of Indonesia, which is the West Papuan who live in West Papua. In terms of their human rights, many people have under the pressure and repression of the military and police. And I agree that now under special autonomy law, we have Papuans themselves, indigenous peoples of Papuan, on the position of bureaucrats, head of regency, governor. But my question is, how much authority given to the local leaders to actually implementing all of this, let's say, the special autonomy law, because I understand that special autonomy given to the West Papuan because of the demand for self-determination, especially political self-determination. It means that in that framing, we also have to look at the political self-determination as a bigger context. So I think in this period of time of special autonomy, I think the Jakarta always worried only on the political aspect of self-determination, but not really pay attention of the bigger context of self-determination. You know, self-determination means that you are able to fulfill what you need and run everything under your thinking, your way of doing things. And I think this is very important. And a space for dialogue, negotiation, or any form of Talanoa, I can say, it's very important. Just recently, we have a public hearing. We're supposed to have public hearing with the Papuan representatives on MRP, Majelis Rakyat Papua, which is formed under special autonomy law. However, all the public hearing was canceled because of the political dynamics, but also so far from my observation, the rejection not coming from the people, because people are expecting to have open democracy space for Papuans to speak about their opinion. And I think it's guaranteed by the human rights instrument that people have right to free gather an assembly and you know, deliver their political or any aspirations they have. And I think public hearing is one of the formal legal space given by the special autonomy. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen until now. So my question is why it didn't happen, because it's supposed to be guaranteed by the Constitution itself. And the intervention of the military and police are very strong during this process. And people are very upset because they want to say something. They want to share their opinion. Either people want to talk about political self-determination or other aspect of self-determination. But I think when it should be guaranteed by the Constitution that people have freedom of expression and space for assembly. So I think maybe I leave it there and then later we can discuss more around that. Thank you.
Kunaka Rosa. Thank you, Rosa. You stay on the line, and before we'll open up the session for questions. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. I can sense it from inside the file here in Suva, Fiji. And also, just a reminder for those of you who are joining us online, if you have any questions to any of the panel members have already spoken, please do send your questions now on using the chat option on your computer so we can have them ready. Now, for the last, certainly not the least member of our panel, Reverend James Bagwan, who's the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches. Nakataltala.
Whenever I hear not the least, I wonder whether they're talking about my size. Sorry, just a little Pacific humor. As we greet one another, the words of Nisambula Vinaka, which translate as, really, when we translate its fullest meaning, may you have life in abundance. Selamat pagi to our participants and colleagues here from Indonesia. And in the context of Talanoa and recognizing the indigenous people of Papua, I also say, wah, 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 wah.
Wow, wow.
Alifeleti has, in his presentation, acknowledged already the role of civil society in raising the issue around the rights of indigenous Papuans in West Papua, what we call Tanah Papua. And there were very strong calls, as we have seen in the presentation, And I want to acknowledge very much what Rosa has shared, and I don't want to detract from the on-the-ground observations that she has shared. So I will keep my comments brief so that really we can move into the Talanoa part of today. But I think it's important to acknowledge that when we gather in the Pacific as people of the past, present, and future, we acknowledge history. Recognizing that West Papuan leaders were present at the founding of key institutions in the Pacific. First regional SPC conference in 1950 had West Papuan representatives, then from Dutch New Guinea. We also had founding members from the churches in Papua at the foundation of the Pacific Conference of Churches. And to date, the 4 largest churches, indigenous churches in Papua, are members of PCC, and we acknowledge also the Papua Council of Churches. Having said that, we also heard in the presentation around the Pacific's presence on the UN Security Council, or UN Human Rights Council rather. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that Indonesia has a seat also on the Human Rights Council, 2020 to 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And so there is a challenge for the people, the government of Indonesia, in implementation of human rights protocols. Indonesia has signed and ratified the UN International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. And as Rosa shared, there are also human rights provisions in its constitution and laws. But what we continue to see, and here we receive our information directly from our member churches and on the ground, that these are still lacking in implementation. Just on Tuesday, over 50 people were arrested in Merauke at a meeting to discuss their concerns with the special autonomy law. Rosa has shared the challenges facing the lives in the balance, the women and children, internally displaced people, the need for dialogue, sustained and meaningful dialogue that can take place in communities without fear of repression. The challenge of development, taking into account the indigenous cultural understanding of development. The regional call from civil society organizations, churches, and social movements continue to be for the United Nations to act on the Pacific Island leaders' resolutions on West Papua, to intervene as per resolutions on West Papua. That COVID notwithstanding, and we know that the invitation and the discussions have happened well before COVID came into the region, for the government of Indonesia to allow that fact-finding mission into West Papua and to respect the call for Pacific leaders in terms of the UN Human Rights Commission to send in a team and respect those findings. We continue to urge the current PIF chair, and we acknowledge the work that their chair and the Secretary General have been doing. And we look forward to discussions around the forum leaders meeting this year, however brief it may be. And we continue to call for the incoming chair of the forum to continue the Pacific Island Leaders Forum resolutions and report back to the forum leaders meeting in 2021. We need to open the story. We need access for information. And this also includes access to foreign journalists to be able to come in and investigate. Friends, one of our speakers, and I will conclude here speaking from the position of the church, one of the speakers talked about God's will or God's help. And from the church perspective, that includes listening to God's instructions about how we are called to treat one another. We cannot speak of God and God's help and God's wisdom if we are not listening to the basic commands to treat people with dignity and allow them to express their views without fear of violence. Renaka.
Nawalebu Talatala. So the 5 members of the panel have spoken. You've respectfully sat and listened. Now it's your turn. So as we have discussed at the beginning, if you have a question, if you want to ask a question, you raise your hand and there will be roving microphones that will come to you. You ask your question, state your name, your organization, and who are you directing the question to, if you like. So who's going to start for us? Anyone online have a question? Maybe any question? Yes. Maybe I'll start it off. Okay, sorry. This young man over there. We have a question from the floor.
Bulavinak, everyone. My name is Manoa, and I'm a PL 101 student from USP. So I want to thank you for this dialogue. It's been really educational to learn new insights from speakers and from yourselves. I understand that a lot of what the speakers were saying, particularly those 2 from Indonesia, they're talking about special autonomy for West Papua. And one of the articles that I was reading from the Diplomat, whereby the writer was quoting from the chair of the Western Papua's liberation movement. Her name was Branny Wang, if I can remember correctly. She was talking on a referendum for independence and not really autonomous. So my question would be to Mr. Alifeleti. With regards to PIFS and the work that PIFS does with dialoguing with Indonesia and the human rights crisis in West Papua, apart from dialoguing, apart from sending in a response team from the United Nations Human Rights Commission, what other steps does will PIF take in order to address the crisis happening in West Papua?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a loaded question and a difficult one because you recall we make decisions based on consensus. And leaders have given us very clear instructions that is to take a human rights-based approach to the issues of West Papua, to pursue open and constructive dialogue with Indonesia. And we've done that. I think we've reached a point that we need to find innovative ways to get further to address the issues of human rights. The other issue is addressing the root causes of the conflict. And this is linked to self-determination. It's no doubt that's an issue. And leaders have made it very clear to us that the appropriate place for those discussions is the same route that they took to become independent themselves. And that is from the UN system, through the UN system. So with what tools we have, we continue to advocate for human rights. We were hoping to go back to West Papua to visit the Human Rights Commission, and we're still working with Indonesia on that. We continue to engage the High Commissioner Bachelet's office to encourage a visit to West Papua at the earliest opportunity. Have in mind that we are not the only players in this space. So the analogy I use is like fishing nets. So we're just one. We capture the political issues, and then our colleagues from civil society, they take it from a different angle and they filter, they catch the gaps that we aren't able to address. The students do that, the people in West Papua do that, so that we have events like today that we can raise these issues, increase the critical mass, increase the public consciousness about this issue. Having said that, it's been done before in our region, where we've had, and I'm referring to Timor-Leste. So people ask us, well, you did it there, why not here? And I go back to my first point. The appropriate place is the United Nations, and leaders have made it clear to us. But we do support, address human rights. That's our main focus. I also note that 2 of our members are currently in the UN human rights process. That's French Polynesia in New Caledonia as members of the C24. So that's our position. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Is there another question? I have a question for Nick Messett. Nick, are you still there with us? I enjoyed your presentation talking about the systems in place. Seems to be a good system in place, and the processes are already in place for the people of West Papua or Papua. Do you want to answer the question as to how you're using that systems and the processes that you have in place to stop the violence and the killings in West Papua? Because that has been also raised by both Reverend James Bogwan and also Rosa. Nick? Nick Messett.
Hello, can you hear me?
Go ahead, Nick. Did you hear the
Yes.
question?
Yes, I'm totally agree with that. I can say that negotiation is underway now. A good news is the former Vice President of Indonesia, Bapak Yusuf Kala, is preparing for a dialogue between Papuans and the central government. If the government of the Republic of Indonesia agree, then he will proceed with the system that he has done with Aceh people back in Helsinki in 2015. I hope this system that can be used to bring all the people together, the Papuans from outside and inside comes together and talk out what they want for their own country. But one thing, Indonesia and Papua are one. Has been decided back on the 19th of November, 1969, which is about 2 days ago, by the United Nations due to the act of free choice. Whether it is fraudulent or what, as Alfred has said, we are here to talk about human rights. We don't want to talk about the sovereignty of a country. I was a member of the OPM, and I told you, I was the one that was present in 2000 in Bitapaka when they put Indonesia's name to become a dialogue partner, and we agree. Every Papuans, even the late Tejerual, I say, why you have to do that? Even myself and Franz Albert Yoku, the late Franz Albert Yoku, we said we have to do that because Indonesia is governing our country. How can we talk with other foreign countries? We have to talk with Indonesia. But this has been a long time. I returned to Indonesia to see what happens, what will happen. But until today, I'm very sad what has been going on in Papua. As a Papuan, I feel sad. This issue must be stopped. So we have, as Papuans, we have to come together. We have to use somebody like Mr. Kala, the former vice president, who was willing to negotiate, to become mediator between the central government and the Papuans, to sort it out, the grievances, what they want. Indonesia had given us the special autonomy back in 2001. So we have to look into our condition in Papua itself, how the Papuans manage themselves now, with there's plenty of money going around. And we have to blame the Papuans themselves. They don't look after the people in their own country. Bupatis, governors, they think that the money given by the central government is for their own use. That's why grievances, people calling for independence, because they think independence is easy money. You can get easy. You don't work, money comes. Well, we are not Australians, we are not Americans. Well, you have a doll or you have a social welfare. We have to work. This is the type of thing that I have observed in Papua since I returned 2007. Misuse of money that given by the central government for the people of Papua. And because of that, sometimes they went, oh, Jakarta didn't give us money. Lying to people.
Okay. Nick, can I ask you to wrap up otherwise, or if you want to refer to addressing the question that was asked?
Yes.
What
Yes,
is
go.
anything that will be done about the violence and the killings? Because you talk about your National Commission for Human Rights.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about, you've gone off and talk about abuse of money and all that.
Yeah,
we're talking
okay.
about human rights here. As
Human
I also
rights,
have some questions
yes.
pending to ask further.
Human rights abuses must be stopped. And that's the question that we have to ask the central government. We as Papuan, we need that. We don't want any people that be killed or Papuans. They are part of Indonesia. And
Thank
I
you.
totally agree that we have to come to an end to this massacres that happens in Papua. Thank you.
Thank you. This is comment that's come online from John. He said the issue is not about the natives becoming leaders, but about the authority to implementing truly and purely special autonomy. And he also states that the most dangerous for indigenous Papuans is the newest law about omnibus law. This law benefits investors more than locals. We fear that our forest or supermarket will be taken by investors. Natives will lose their sacred places and land. Dr. Velix, would you like to respond?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, my brothers, John Wetipo, some questions. First of all, I emphasize that actually power, we decentralize power to Papua and West Papua province. It means the special authority, the spatial budget, and then spatial framework already undertaken by our brothers and sisters in Papua and West Papua. If we compare with the new order regimes, for example, like the head of majors of regions, some from Java, but the new area, especially special autonomy period, all native Papuan to be governors, majors, and regions. It means Papuans already participate in the local politics to decide, to the plan, and to the science Papuan plan based on their authority. I think this is one of the entry point when we believe that our Papuan leaders in Papua administrations in Papua and West Papua provinces. And the second, I think we realize that the lack of skill this is we face in Papuans and across Papua. So this is one of problem in Papua. So now the central governments and Papua and West Papua government introduced some like new education framework, how to emphasize vocational policy and emphasize the affirmative policy to Papuan peoples in the bureaucracy and in the economy in some level. For examples, last year, Mr. President already introduced like special presidential instructions to give access to the Papuan local business to involve in the many project in Papua and West Papua province. This is based on the presidential instructions. This is one example of how we design the affirmative policy to develop Papuan local businessmen. And the second is about how we design some program with ministries, some private company, and state-owned business, like be in national level. We now give access to the Papuans. Now we open for the 1,000 young Papuan from Papua and West Papua province to take part job in the state's owned company, and now introduce some the young Papuans leader to involve in the all ministries in national level in Jakarta. And I say before that the government already launched this the presidential instructions 2 months ago. This is the new framework, how we emphasize more detail how the design of economy in Papua based on the local identity. So I think this is one of the strategy how we deal with the local people to answer their needs, to bring public services closer to the Papuans, even the highland area in the northern part of Papua, in the and southern part of Papua. And
Thank you.
the last
If you can
the last
sorry,
actually
just have some other questions pending now.
okay, yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Sorry, I mean, you're just wrapping up. You just want to wrap up, Dr. Velix, or that's it? Okay, thank you. This is a question that's pending online. I read that the Pacific Island Forum was to have an international human rights fact-finding mission. Has this taken place? And if not, why not? Directed to Alfred.
In 2015, we asked for one, and the request was declined. And Secretary General has just reminded me, that's why we take the UN route. But we tried, and it was declined at the various highest levels.
Thank you. We have a question from the floor. Can we have the microphone to Willem? And can you also direct Willem your question, who you want to address?
Naka. First of all, thank you to all the panelists. My name is William. I am a MA student thesis doing my research on West Papua diplomacy. My question is directed towards the Pacific Islands Forum. Recently at the panel discussion at the University of the South Pacific, there was the discussion on membership of French Polynesia and New Caledonia. And at this discussion, it was highlighted by Dame Meg Taylor of the 3 layers of inclusion into the forum. You had independent nations, you had self-governing countries, and then you had territories. 2016, we see the obviously French Polynesia and New Caledonia joining because of this. So my curiosity and my interest goes towards whether there may be a 4th layer to include, or is there any pathway? My question is there any pathway for Indonesia to be included in the forum? And based on the framework for Pacific regionalism, given that it's all about political dialogue, inclusiveness. And I believe inclusiveness was the word that was used by Vanuatu for them supporting New Caledonia's entry into the forum. So is there any pathway for West Papua, because they have autonomy, to join the Pacific Islands Forum?
There is. Indonesia is a current forum dialogue partner. And for our communities in West Papua, the civil society, private sector, the churches, we have a mechanism in the forum to engage all those sectors.
Reverend Bhagwan, do you have any comments to make? Anything you want to add? I know I've been itching, so to say a few things after all those presentations.
When we talk about, I mean, this is the important thing. When we talk about rights, you can't separate some from the others. And either we're going to uphold all the rights, and that's why I mentioned the civil rights, political rights of individuals, because those are part of their rights. So you can't say you have only some rights and the others we will not support you. And so if the communities want to have that conversation about what self-determination is, and self-determination is also much more than political self-determination. These need to be upheld. I think that's an important thing for us. I'm also very concerned that as we find the churches starting to engage about upholding the rights of their citizens and their members, I start to see what I hope is not true, but a targeting of clergy, both Catholic and Protestant pastors. And so, that's why I was talking about the climate of fear. How can we have meaningful dialogue, which is the right of every citizen of Indonesia, in a climate of fear? Naka.
And you've basically touched on one of the questions that just come online, Reverend James. Maybe, is there anything else you want to add to this question? It says, on the one hand, we are calling and working on solving human rights issues and safeguarding human rights. But on the other hand, there are reports of breaches from both sides. What can we do to break this cycle? And the reports and claims from all sides of this issue. And the questionnaire wanted the good Reverend to answer.
Yeah, I don't know how good I am as a reverend, but again, where is the UN in this? PIFs can only act really, as we have seen, the forum can only act within the bounds of consensus, what the leaders discuss and agree on, and act in that space. They can encourage. Civil society too, all we can do is raise the issue, and we raise these issues of concern. And the longer that these rights, the abuses of these rights continue, the louder the call will be for self-determination. Because if things are not moving, they erupt. And so there is a need for the UN to step up here. As Brother Nicholas said, we have 1969's Act of Some Choice. But we are now in 2020. Indonesia as a country has signed on to these protocols. The UN has them as members of the Human Rights Council, along with Fiji and others. Where is the UN showing its leadership? And that's the question we really need to ask as well. Naka.
Thank you. Any question from the floor? Yes, this lady in front here. Can we have a microphone?
Thank you. I'm a Silika and I represent the University of the South Pacific Human Rights Alumni Association. I would like to direct a question to Dr. Velix from Indonesia in regards to part of their framework, which is basic access to education. My concern is last year, we worked with the Yougsolwara Pacific who approached us to unite in making our voices louder for the issues in West Papua. And then we had an opportunity to video call with a spokesman from West Papua who had spoken on behalf of the students who were displaced from Indonesian universities. And they were reaching out to us, requesting us if we could assist them to come over and study at the University of the South Pacific. So in our capacity of representing students, human rights, student activists in the University of the South Pacific, we were unable to address their question at that point in time. So my question is now to Dr. Velix. Access to education, are those displaced students from Indonesian universities still out there not having any education at all?
Dr. Felix.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, my sisters. Actually, education is the basic right of Papuan peoples. So, in our policy now emphasize the basic educations, primary education, for examples. But now we introduce the concept of primary education in line with the customary area. For example, we now introduce like boarding school in some area in Papua and West Papua province because the vast area and many people live distributed in many areas. So one choice we build boarding school, primary school in some area. And the second, now we emphasize the like we call a small school, sekolah kecil. This is a small school distributed in some area in Papua and West Papua provinces. And the third point, now we try to make collaborative work in some private business, university, and many foundations to make like special content or curriculum to improve how the teachers to teach content of curriculum to the Papuans. So this is as a part of affirmative actions to develop a primary school based on the local situations. And the second about the
university students, Dr. Velix. I think
yes.
the question was on displaced students of university in West Papua.
Yeah, actually, this is we already discussed. for the national government, we discussed with governor, especially Governor Papuan government, and we discussed with the rector of Cendrawasih University how to design some options. One options we the Papuan University can accept them to continue their study in line with the department in the original university in Java, for example. And the second, now we already sent some displacement student to the Java Islands, especially for Java Island, and some in university in Sulawesi Island to continue their study. And the third, some students still in Papua. So now we'll discuss how they continue their study in the next year. And this is our option to resolve our brothers and sisters displacement students from outside Papua.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Mr. Moderator, may I make some comments?
We haven't heard
Thank
from
you.
you've been quietly listening, so your turn now, Rosa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving space for women also to speak, because in many of our realities that women in West Papua, our voice not be heard by many layers of the policymaking authorities. So I just want to bring us back to the key of the conversation today. Like we tried to look at the layers of different policies and approach on development, but I just want to raise two things. First, we have political problems. The political issue and political problems need to be solved through the right mechanism. And that's not my area to speak, but we heard from the conversation that we have groups that raise the issue of self-determination, political self-determination, independence, and that creates a conflict, armed conflicts and other bigger conflict that I think it's important to address that issue in a mechanism that can accommodate all the voices of people in West Papua. And as Panik mentioned about Yusuf Kala came and appeared as a person who wants to mediate the process of negotiation. And our question, or my question is, the negotiation or dialogue process is not only about the internal dialogues between Papuans and Jakarta on the sectoral issue, but we also have other issues, as I mentioned, about political issues that need to be addressed at the different levels. But I agree that there must be some process of conversation that regarding all the issues related to development and other non-political self-determination. And I think the process should be done, and it's not only on the level that someone from Jakarta come and leading the conversation, but it should be a process of conversation with the people, with honest conversation. I'm afraid that many approach we tried to open the space for conversation, but it always like we sometimes, from my perspective, sometimes Jakarta is too afraid to talk about human rights because it always related to the political perspective. As I said, human rights need some good response from the state because state is the one who responsible for the human rights issues. And political is another kind. So I think we need to look at the human rights response. And I also want to respond to Bimantara's questions about incidents in Duga and claim about the armed struggle killed people. I think this is the reason why we're calling for the independent fact-finding mission to come and visit, because we need independent expert to witness, to investigate, and to report what exactly the root cause of the problems. either it's in Duga. We call for Komnas HAM to come and conduct the investigation on, and we call for independent fact-finding mission. But until now, we haven't heard anything come yet. And recently we had a fact-finding mission from Komnas HAM and also some other fact-finding mission by our provincial governor. So I think we need more of that, because after that we need to identify who's the actors without pointing and blaming, because we have actors from the state, which is the military operation, and it's not something that people don't know. It's very visible. I live in the town when I can see the trucks brought all these, military members with the uniform and guns, and we knew that they flew to the highlands. This is not the light things. I live inside West Papua, so I want to say that. And this is the pictures that we see every day. You know, in the morning you're walking on the street, you see the trucks, numbers of trucks with the military members, and we knew that they flew there. So I think if we want to pointing, then we have to send fact-finding mission, so then they can give a clear report about who's the actor, what happened, what the root cause of the conflict. So then we have very credible and reliable information to put on the table and to start talk about what is the best solution or what is the next step. If it's political, then go to the political area. But if it's human right, then we go to the human right mechanism and process. And I think it need to be done. And civil society organizations, human rights organizations in West Papua are very welcome if there is a space like that, because we've been trying very hard. Another thing is also like, I just want to bring into the, because of our voices and also because of the recommendation that came from the PIF forum last few years ago, and still raising the same awareness, I think Yougsolwara Pacific made a submission supported by Piango, Peng, and PCC and Pacifica. I think the key issue is still there. We need fact-finding mission from the forum, and I think it is also a good opportunity for Indonesia as a partner of dialogue of PIF to open this space. So then we have a delegation from PIF with the churches and other components to come and visit West Papua, and also to see directly what happened on the ground. So then it's not just like people think it's just a rumor, because it's also very important for Indonesia to give a good image of Indonesia's willingness to solve all these human rights problems, because we can't start a dialogue and conversation without having an open space with honest conversation with reliable information. So I think this is one thing that I want to propose also to the delegation of Indonesia here, which is also my brothers and my uncles, that we need to open that space, because we can't just talk and from the distance. We need to bring the members of the PIF country also to visit, because Indonesia also partner of dialogue. I think this is one concrete things I want to raise. But as a citizen of Indonesia, I think we demand the state to take more serious action, especially with our IDPs, women and children.
Yes.
We agree that there are many things we need to work on: education, health, and other basic rights. But one aspect of the human rights abuses happen is because of the political aspiration. And I think this aspect also need to be put on the table of the discussion. And sometimes approach is just directly in the repression, and people start to talk about their political, non-political. Our experience, we always face this repression came and questioning people without giving a space for them to speak freely. I know that Indonesia is a democratic country, and we want to stand on that position that with the democratic space we can speak freely. Either the voice is heard or not, but I think the most important thing, which is the principle of human rights, is to give a space for people to talk about their things.
Thank you,
To look
Rosa.
at how you respond.
You're also
Thank
having
you, Vinaka.
internet issues as well. And time is fast catching up on us. We've heard from the youth, young people of West Papua through Rosa. We heard from representatives of Indonesian government. We also heard from the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. And there's also one entity, a stakeholder that's being mentioned repeatedly, even by Rosa and previous speakers. Is there a representative of the United Nations here who would like to respond to issues that have been raised?
Thank you very much. So my name is Heike Alefsen. I'm the regional representative of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner. In fact, I am a member of the audience for a particular reason, and that is that this office actually in Fiji here, which is a regional office covering 16 countries, does not particularly cover this issue of Indonesia, Papua. This is covered by our headquarters and by our regional office in Bangkok. So just wanted to say that at the outset. There have been questions about the mission, and it is my understanding, and that's all I can say on this issue. Obviously, we are aware of the issues. The office is following up with all of those parties involved. And it is my understanding that the negotiations are still ongoing. The invitation obviously has been received, and the office is pursuing with the Indonesian authorities, I understand, the mission. And this is all the information that I have at this very moment, but it's all very well noted. And I will certainly also pass on any information that I've been receiving from this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vinaka. Final question from the floor.
Thank you. Not really a question, it's just to probably share with Nick and Dr. Velix that now that the Pacific Matters has been rolled out, we are expecting this dialogue to continue. And I think this is one of the exciting things for us from the civil society to be in this space, and thank you to the PIF's Secretariat. So now we are not expecting Indonesia to pull out, because our Mets in the Pacific is now open up, and we are really looking forward, particularly our young students and the Yougsolwara Pacific are now here, in the Met. So thank you. Naka.
Now valuable. I'm afraid we have to wrap up, but just before we do that, we'll just go around the members of the panel for their final, I've been told, 30 seconds. And what starts now, Reverend?
Yeah, I'll give my 30 seconds to Rosa. Thank you.
Vinaka, Reverend. Yes, human right is a universal concept that needs to be respected by every single human in this world. And I think the life of West Papuans are the matters of all of us. So we need to take an action to save the life of West Papuan, no matter your political backgrounds, your standing position. But I think the human life is the most important thing. Vinaka.
Vinaka, Rosa. Nick, message? Your final 30 seconds wrap up. Do we have Nick with us still? Otherwise, we can go to you,
Hello?
Dr. Velix. Okay. Always take a few. Yes, your final 30 seconds, sir.
Me.
Yes, please. We are wrapping
Yes.
up now.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. If in America they say Black matters, Black lives matter, in Papua I will say Papua lives matters too. So we have to find a solution to solve the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Velix, thank you too for staying with us.
Yeah. Thank you. Since 11 March 2020, our president said we have to design the new spirit, new paradigm, new design to the big jump for Papua development. So our perspective that development is to answer the basic right of Papuan people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vinaka Vakalevu. And to the man who basically planned all this, organized everything, Alifeleti, for the last 30 seconds.
Thank you, Samsoni. My hope is that we continue this dialogue, and I hope my colleagues from the Indonesian embassy and those in Jakarta agree that we continue to do this. The only way we solve this is through these kinds of forums, as well as other political solutions we can come up with. I'd like to thank Rosa and other panelists for their courage in being part of this panel. Of course, to the good Reverend James who have been here, and yourself, Samsoni. Finally, to Secretary General for allowing this to continue. We will continue to do so, to push for human rights, to address the root causes, to resolve the issues of human rights abuses, alleged human rights abuses in West Papua. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alfred. And to conclude, as we wrap up, we'll give the floor back to the Madam Secretary General, Dame Meg Taylor.
But having listened to everybody's comments, conversations, and with respect to everybody, this is not an easy conversation. And Rose has said very, very clearly, there has to be a space that is created so the dialogue can happen in Indonesia. And for us here, it's about the space here. But I'm not going to let the United Nations, I'm sorry, say to me that this is not dealt with by the office here. The former UN High Commissioner came here to Suva. He gave us his word that this would be followed up by the UN High Commission. And in my work, when I have tried to reach out to Geneva, I've not had the responses that I'd hoped for. In a few months, I will have left this position. A new Secretary General will come in here, but the purpose of the issues for human rights for the people in West Papua will go on because it's ingrained in the very hearts of citizens of the region and with the leadership of this region. I do want and hope that the UN will be responsive and the Indonesian government will also be responsive so that this matter moves forward and not continually having conversations about it. I thank you all for participating and for your commitment.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General. That ends this week's session on human rights in West Papua. We thank all members of the panel. Thank you too, members of the audience, excellencies, young people, and other people of the Pacific. Thank you for joining us. We'll have another session for Talanoa on Friday next week, and we'll invite you to register as you usually do. Now, value for your attendance. Everybody is now welcome to have a few refreshments. For those of us who are here in the Papale, and for those of you who joined us online, thank you too for your participation. Naka Wakaleo.
Thank you, Vinaka.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pak
Thank
Velix,
you.
Pak Nico,
Yeah,
Pak
my sister.
Nicholas,
Yeah.
Pak
Kakak Rosa.
Sade.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Thank you, Yougsolwara,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everyone.
Okay. My brother Jorwetipo and